Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Miller from Petaluma PD. He has 20 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to today's conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Miller. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I've been actually really looking forward to this. I know of you guys. I've met some of your team out in California before, and so I actually am familiar with a lot of the wellness efforts that you guys are making within your organization. So I'm excited to highlight those today. I wanted to maybe start with your background. Maybe give
Sure.
us a little bit of insight into what the last 20 years have looked like for you.
Yeah, yeah. So, relatively new police chief. It's been in this seat for almost 2 years, but been with my organization. It's the only organization I've worked for, as you mentioned, 20 years, and had the opportunity to, serve in a variety of roles through every single rank in the organization, and really have worked my way up the ranks, but served as a gang enforcement officer, as a collateral assignment through our patrol division, a field training officer, moved over to investigations, was a detective for us for a number of years, and then promoted and was the sergeant in patrol. Promoted out of there into our special operations division, was a lieutenant over first patrol and then traffic and investigations. And then 2020 promoted to deputy chief, and in 2023 promoted to the chief of police. And each of those experiences have been unique. I've kind of had more of a background in gangs and narcotics and kind of crimes of persons investigations, felony assaults. Um, but really, really rewarding opportunity. Really have enjoyed my time here at Petaluma. Um, had had the ability and the opportunities to take the initiative and drive a lot of projects and as I mentioned, sit in a lot of different seats and have unique perspectives that I think have given me a really strong foundation to be pretty well-rounded in the professional policing.
Thank you. If you had to maybe self-reflect and identify maybe one of your greatest successes in this career, what do you think that would be?
So, I, I try to share with our young staff that like everybody wants to be in the headlines, they want to have these great, big, huge cases, and that's just not the reality. And so I live and work in my community, and it's the little things that I think have been the most impactful for me. There's a gentleman in town that I got him on a sales case. He had been selling methamphetamine in a neighborhood for a number of years, was pretty well known, and went to prison and was in custody for a number of years, and returned out and has done his time and has been clean and sober. And every year on his date of sobriety, he reaches out to me. And, surprisingly, there's some other things going on in our community, and he's kind of risen up and been involved in helping people with treatment and sobriety themselves. And we've run into each other in the last couple months, and he still reminds me of the impact and getting him on the path towards being more successful and still being with us. And feels that if we hadn't intervened in some of the conversation that we had during his arrest, that maybe those circumstances wouldn't be what they are today. And so things like that. And I know that's common in the profession, but I think they're also uniquely ours. And I think we encourage and try to get the new generation of police officers coming into the field to develop those own stories and their own kind of relationships.
That is actually going to make me so emotional. I don't know if you know my background. I don't know if we've ever talked about it before, but my dad was addicted to methamphetamines. He went to prison for the sale of narcotics for 6 years. And so that story hit home to me. And I think that's an important reminder that the little things do matter and you can impact people's lives in a positive way. And maybe I think sometimes we look at it because my dad was gang affiliated. And when he got out, like he was in and out for another decade after. And I think a lot of us, like myself included, like kind of gave up on him and just thought that there wasn't rehabilitation or that he wouldn't come out of it. And he eventually did. And I think that if you remember that, to know that you can have an impact on people, even if maybe they don't seem like they're, what word am I thinking of? Not changeable, but
Yeah, that's okay.
so that hit home to me, and I really appreciate that because I've never met anyone in law enforcement who didn't enter into this career because they want to help people, and that's a prime example of you helping someone. So,
And you never know when someone's going to be ready. And I
mm,
think that really is key, whether it's someone in the community or even within our own ranks, that, we see the red flags and we may know things and we may try and make attempts, but you never know when the day is going to be that they're going to be receptive towards your help. And so
yeah,
don't miss the opportunity and at least try.
yeah, no, I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing. What do you think has been the biggest challenge?
Uh, I think there's two ways to answer that, right? I think through the tenure of my career, that's probably a very different answer than in my current role or the last few years. But
Sure.
keeping it more centric to present day, I think, the last 5 years have been tough.
Yeah.
I think anyone who's got a little bit of seasoning in policing would admit that it's been volatile and it's been trying and if you're a leader, it's been exhausting. And we've had to force ourselves to change. We've been more thoughtful as an industry and accepting of kind of some of the blind spots and the gaps and the things that maybe we should have done a long time ago.
Mm,
But the rate in which we've done that has been something that, more has evolved in the last 5 years than the first 15 years of my career.
yeah.
And the complexities of the job and the weight of the job and the margin for error seems to be slimmer than ever.
Mm,
And so whether it's communicating with the public, whether it's communicating internally with staff, and navigating difficult situations or decisions, I just think it's a little crunchy right now. Everybody's quick to respond. They're highly attached or emotionally driven on a lot of these decisions and incidents, and it's hard to focus on what we do really well. Like if we could just focus on operations and policing, we excel in that arena and our people are professional and do a great job, the majority of the time. But there's, these things that come up internally and externally where we kind of misstep or stub our toe and we've got to work through those things. And it's been difficult. And I think there's a lot of things that have been happening outside of just police issues that have been pulled in, that complicated and are really outside of our arena. Whether it's mental health of community members has been a topic of national discussion right now, and that's something that, I don't think anyone in policing really ever felt that we were the best suited to respond primarily to those type of incidents, but we found ourselves doing that. And there's been great strides and evolution there, but that's still a challenge. And so, working through those and focusing on maintaining safety and security and sense of safety within our communities, I think has been difficult.
yeah. I appreciate you sharing that because I will say, obviously, you're not alone in that. There's been a lot of conversations about the last 5 years, and I think there are two sides of the coin. Like, on one end, like you said, it's giving you the opportunity to focus more on maybe some things that could be changed for the better. But then on the other end, really challenging with, public perception or, I'll just say like the vibe
Sure.
as
Yeah.
like very like simple way to say it. And of course all the other things that are going on. But how do you think that, because I know you were promoted around that time to deputy chief at the beginning of COVID. And now you're chief and it's still kind of not the same, but a similar environment where it's high intensity and high stress. How did that impact you as a leader? Do you think that there were any lessons that you learned throughout that time that made you a better leader?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I think coming promoting in 2020 and coming back to that, and anyone who worked in a leadership role during whether it was the the social justice movement, the response to George Floyd's murder, the pandemic in and of itself. You know, you developed a cadence and an understanding of kind of what the impacts are, how the nuance that these discussions and your decisions and your response to things have, and the impact. And I think we're starting to see some of that volatility within our communities right now, especially in California. And it's difficult, and there's complexities on trying to keep your staff focused and engaged and understanding, what their role is. And I think for me especially, we navigated some challenges here. We had an unfortunate on duty incident that became notable in our community. And so I learned a lot of navigating those difficult processes and decisions. And then, I owe my predecessor, my chief, who's recently retired, a shout out. He gave me a lot of autonomy to really step up, and probably stuck around longer than he had originally anticipated because of the timing and some of the difficult things that were happening in the profession. And so I got the opportunity of kind of being able to lead with a safety blanket,
Mm.
which has really served me well now. So, I mean, while I've been in seat for just a couple years, I really feel like, for the past 5 years, I've been able to lead at this organization. Um, and so I'm grateful and thankful for that.
I think too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like when you have that opportunity to learn from someone in that way, and they kind of gave you that opportunity to grow as a leader that you are, that you would translate that into how you want to, help other people progress in their career underneath of you as well. Does that?
Yeah, we have, a perspective, at least in my organization, that it's about coaching, mentorship, and
Yeah.
development, and that we really want to push our people. It's everyone's struggling with trying to encourage their staff to be proactive,
Mm.
right? And there's this whole concept of like, if we don't do anything, then we can't do anything wrong. Well, I'd rather people do the right things, work really hard, and make hard decisions in tough situations for the right reasons because they feel like it's the right thing to do. And we'll make mistakes. But if you're reasonable, if you're appropriate, you're lawful, we'll support you all day long. And, there's those falling forward moments. And I've benefited immensely from those at every point in my career. And I do it on a weekly basis still as a police chief. I make mistakes and misspeak and make decisions that in retrospect maybe weren't the best at the time. But I try to remind our staff that you may not always agree or you may think that this is a mistake, but we're doing those things at, with the best of intentions. And doesn't mean that if we, make a mistake that it's the end of the world or it can't be fixed, or, we can't move on beyond it. And, pick yourself up, move forward, acknowledge where improvement can be made, and go out there and get after it again. And I think that's something that I hope anyone that's entering in the profession recognizes, that if we're incrementally better than we were the day before, just imagine where you'll be over the period of time. And just the same way in a policing approach, if you do and address the little things out there one by one, it'll be better, and your community will be better the day following than it was the day before. And it can be a really simple concept, but it can be really super impactful at the same time.
I love the concept of falling forward. I actually learned this through like speaking with you guys, like this, idea of, yeah, you're going to fall. Everyone is human. Like we are all going to make mistakes in our lives and our careers, but how can you learn and how can you grow and how can you move forward from that? And I think that coming from you as the chief saying, I still do this on a weekly basis is so relatable. And I think it just gives like it gave me permission. Like when you said that, I was like, oh, okay, like there's someone else out there who's not perfect and who does experience those things on a consistent basis. And now I feel better about my imperfections and my flaws because we all go through it. And I think for the longest time, I tried so hard to give this illusion of perfection. And we know that perfection doesn't exist, right? It's something that you strive for. Like you want to be, like, especially if you're like type A personality, like you want to be the best, you want to be perfect, but it's kind of chasing that rabbit, right? It's like there's never ever going to be something that's absolutely perfect. But I think that's incredibly unrelatable. If I were to walk around and be like, I'm perfect, like nothing phases me, I never fail, I never make mistakes, I never misspeak. And so I really appreciate that level of vulnerability and authenticity to say, like, even as the leader of an organization, I still, on a consistent basis, feel like I have room for improvement. And there's times where I feel like I make mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, we try to even model that with the community. Like policing is an imperfect application, and we're policing people who are fundamentally imperfect.
Mhm.
And so, the reality for many of us, especially in my organization, is the majority of my patrol staff have just a few years on. And while they're smart, intelligent, high character individuals, they're going to make mistakes. I expect them to make mistakes,
Mhm.
and mistakes of the part. But we try to remind our community, like, have grace and have patience. These are 22 and 23-year-olds that are out there making split-second decisions with limited information, with relatively junior tenure in sometimes impossible positions. And, many of them are, you know, single individuals, or, they're not married or don't have children yet. And we're asking them to go into, domestic violence situations and tell them this is what the state of California thinks that you should be doing in your marriage, and here's the laws there. And it's just difficult. And so, I think everybody, whether it's officers, administrators, members of the public, if they just gave each other a little bit of grace and respect, we'd probably be in a lot better place and a lot better headspace, both personally and professionally.
I agree. And I think too, the word that popped up in my head was just having some empathy, which I know is sometimes a hard skill to learn and a hard skill to teach. And it's definitely something I've struggled with throughout my life is to have empathy for people. But I think if you can look back, I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I was a disaster. Like, there is absolutely no way that I could have done that job. Even today, I don't think I could. I like have so much respect for you guys. But I think when I was that young and all the pressures, right, of wellness and financial wellness and the functions of the career and family and all the stuff like that young, I think if you can put it in that perspective of like, these are humans, these are young people, and even if they're not young people, they're still people, and there's, flaws in human nature. And if you can put yourself in people's shoes a little bit and have that empathy, I think that it would go a long way. I agree with you. I wanted to kind of go back to something you said earlier. So, in you had this experience of COVID and the stressors of COVID. You also said that there was an incident that shook your agency, and I was hoping that maybe you can dive into that a little bit. And I'm curious to know how both of those events impacted wellness.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, one of the incidents that we've had a few. So we're a relatively small agency, and so, the frequency of events that larger agencies may experience, they may have more familiarization or be more accustomed to weathering some of these things. But we've had a few through the years that have been really impactful, and, the scale of which they influence an organization of our size is um, is really challenging. And so, I think the incident you're referencing is that we had a traffic collision, and we have a pretty significant road that runs through our entire town. It's parallels a river, and the driver of the car left the roadway. They were speeding, driving recklessly, and left the roadway and went into our river and flipped the car. And there were children in the car. And it turns out that the driver was the mother of these children. And uh, we responded. It's technically, there's some jurisdictional issues like many communities have, where, the city limits are uh, adjoining county jurisdiction or the highway patrol area. And so originally the call went to a different call center and then was transferred to us. But our staff gets there relatively quickly, or what they perceive as being relatively quickly, and immediately go into, emergency response mode. They don't hesitate. They go down the embankment. They're diving in the river. They've got their duty gear on. They're entering the car and they're trying to get these two young girls out. Some of the officers are trying to put on, the fire department had arrived and trying to use their breathing masks, which really aren't set up for a water rescue whatsoever, but they're doing whatever they can. And ultimately, they're not successful. And what we learned through the investigation is, because of some of the time delays, that there was never an opportunity for success. But we ultimately had 5 officers that were impacted adversely through this, and some had to separate from our organization through workers' comp. Some have struggled with it in their own recovery. But what we found is that they perceived that there was something that they could have done.
Mhm.
And so while the facts and the evidence and everything showed that there was little, if anything, that could have been done, and despite their efforts, their perception was that they could have done something else. They could have been quicker in the moment or helped their partner with one more thing. And it just wasn't the case. And, you know, it was impactful. It was difficult losing those people in our organization, and it impacted, some of our handling of that, for our supervisors and leaders and the people that were even trying to assist the staff through procedural processes or through the per personal impacts of those cases. It rippled. It rippled everywhere. It still ripples, frankly. Especially for me, some of those folks are direct relatives of mine, and so um, I have that personal connection to it. I think we look at that incident and the things that we learned from it, both positively and negatively, um, and how we handle and respond to traumatic events, for folks that experience PTSD or PTSI, how we navigate any of our workers' comp kind of processes internally as a city, that we use it as kind of a guiding case.
Mhm.
And what's interesting too is, when we talk with other agencies, that they all kind of have an incident that's like this, that there were 3 or 4 people that responded, and it's often a call that was incredibly graphic or gruesome or challenging, and there were heroic efforts and actions taken. Um, and many times they're involving children, or that there's someone of similar age that the people that responded to, have someone in their own personal life that they kind of projected into that same place. um, but that case it's been a few years, but it's still something that's relatively talked about. It's still something that I think is in the back of all of our heads. It's forever changed our organization. Some things have changed us for the better, frankly. We've learned a lot. We've added a lot of resources. We've kind of learned some things not to do. But I think the fear to some degree is like it's going to happen again. There's going to be the realities and the probability for any police agency is, we're all overdue for traumatic events. Um, I think the big ones like these that stand out, I think you can expect that you're going to have these impacts. And more concerning to me are, what are the calls that we don't know about?
Mhm.
What we found through our case was, some of the folks that were involved in this incident, actually, this is just the one that kind of brimmed over, and there were a lot of other things that already were compounding and building up for them that we had no idea. And some of them are things that outwardly are like, we're hearing, or yeah, there was a child abuse case, or an unattended death, or just a traffic collision. There was just something that seems outwardly benign, or that we deal with, 10, 20 times a day. But those things all, compounded and added up to the place that, while this one was a big one, there probably was a one smaller call that very well could have been the final thing that really pushed them to being in crisis and needing help.
And do you think that that was the event that really jump started your efforts in wellness, or did you already have a wellness program before that, and this was something that was supported through those previous efforts? Like maybe give a little bit of background on, the aftermath of that and how you supported wellness.
Yeah, and so I think it's a little bit of both. So we've always had a peer support team. We've always had wellness initiatives. I think we had never seen, five or six people, a group of folks
Yeah,
go out on stress at once.
yeah,
And really, before that, it had been kind of something that, at least in the early onset of my career, that just never happened, you know, never whatsoever. And we had done work, but definitely this event kind of confirmed and opened our eyes that we really had developed a culture of psychological safety where it was okay to say you needed help. And now, much more so than ever, we've continued to see folks kind of raise their hand and be okay of saying, I'm not okay.
yeah,
And that's something that's very different now, than when I started, which was kind of, you're going to deal with it, suck it up, and, don't talk about it, or that culture of, drinking and getting around and telling the dark humor jokes,
yeah,
which, um, you know, I think that we've gotten to a place that we recognize that there are things that are impactful and this job is difficult, and we all process those things very differently. And how I process it and perceive it is uniquely my own, and I should be respectful for others that may be processing it and having difficulty processing it. And so I'm really proud that we have the type of organization where our staff are willing to go or reach out to our peer support team. Having a peer support team that no one's engaging with is kind of pointless. But when they're coming forward and saying, "Hey, I've got an alcohol issue," or "I'm not dealing with this call," or, recently we had another fatal traffic accident. For us in a small community, we know the people that are impacted in these events. And, like, my children went to school with a family member of this, and they're talking about it in their elementary school classes. And those things, they have direct impacts on our staff. And so we need to be there and helpful and willing to assist them through that. And I think I previously shared with you, we were consulted by the Rand Corporation, and a little bit taken aback that they called and they're like, "Hey, we want to talk to you about, your some of your workers' comp cases, these stress cases you all have been having." And we're like, "Oh God, what did we do? Why are you calling us?"
mhm,
And their rationale was that, based on the metrics, we were seeing more of those type of cases, but we didn't have anyone, um, that had resulted in a suicide. And so they wanted to know why we weren't seeing some of the outcomes or the progressions that other agencies were seeing. And, at the time we were just kind of, dumbfounded that we didn't really know why. But I think it's back to the point that, our staff, it's not an adverse thing. If you need help, we want you to get the help. We want to work through that with you. And we've seen people go off and get help and talk to a therapist, and, get back into a place where they're able and capable to move forward and return to work. And we love that. We want nothing more than people to be able to come back to work if they're capable of doing that. And if they're not, we want them to be, as happy and whole as they can be, so that they can have a vibrant life still. And so I'm immensely thankful. I feel like knocking on wood about, why we got that phone call. But, I think it's about really getting getting your staff into a position that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help.
There's a couple things I want to say about this. So, one, thank you for saying that everyone processes things differently. I think that that takes an immense amount of emotional intelligence to be able to say, just because something impacts me doesn't mean it's going to impact other people, and vice versa. Just because it doesn't impact me doesn't mean that it's not going to impact other people. And that was something that I had to learn over time because when I was younger, I had gone through a lot in my life and I had hardened. I was not empathetic. I had this very hard exterior. I was very nasty. I was immediate to respond. And I had this mentality of kind of what you mentioned earlier of like, just suck it up. Like, what you're going through isn't that bad. Like, I've been through worse. Like, I definitely had that mentality myself. And if someone came up to me and they were like, oh, my parents are getting divorced, whatever, I was like, so? Like, who cares? That was me. It's almost like I'm so embarrassed to say that because that is the polar opposite of who I am today. And I think hurt people. And that was, my way of trying to deal with my own stuff that I hadn't dealt with. But over time, I realized that, wow, just because maybe I've seen these things and, my parents getting divorced or whatever it was might not affect me, that doesn't mean that it's not really affecting somebody else. And we can't diminish that. We have to like recognize that. And I think it's also in the context of wellness, like understanding just because something doesn't work for you doesn't mean that it's not going to work for somebody else. And so having that open mind and understanding that everyone's going through different things and how can you, one, create a culture and an environment that supports that and doesn't judge and doesn't shame or create that stigma, but then how can you also have the various resources so that people have different ways to be able to handle and cope with those things?
Yeah.
I also think that that phone call is so powerful. Like when we talk about like ROI on things, right? Because you said it before, like if people aren't using it, and I always say this too, it's like if even if people are using it, but they're not benefiting from it, then we have to like go back to the drawing board because the goal is for these things to be helping
Sure.
people. And so for someone to call you and say, hey, like we're seeing this, but people aren't taking their lives, that means that those resources have been successful to keep them here, right? And to give them the resources to keep going. And to me, like that's what it's all about, right? And you said that like you want people to thrive. And I've said this before, but it's always the saddest thing to me when I hear, we want people to survive this job. And yes, of course, like 100%, we want you to survive this job. But I think that we can raise that bar. Like we want people to thrive, not just survive. We want you to like be as happy and whole as you possibly can. And then when you retire, you also are that happy whole person and has a long and successful retirement. So there was a few things in there that I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I think to that point too, like definitely surviving is the wrong perspective, but I think we also need to be honest with people. And we ask questions when we're doing, our Chiefs interviews and offering someone a position to come into the business on here's the realities. Like you will face these type of situations. You may be faced with having to take someone's life in a critical incident. You may be asked to go into an unsafe situation. These are the things you're going to see. And so I think overlaying the culture of wellness and seeking assistance when you need it and recognizing when you may need it and having others around you to help you recognize when you need it is the reality of understanding and building resiliency within the ranks.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of if these things are going to happen. I would be lying to you and to everyone to say the person I was 20 years ago when I started has not been impacted, probably to some degree adversely, by this job. This job has changed me. It's impacted my personal life, my marriage, my probably the way I raise my children. Um, but to some degree, you have to be mindful of those impacts
Yeah.
and recognize how to make adjustments and what can you do to navigate those things. And also having the recognition that if you don't think you're going to be impacted or experience these things, then you're just naive. And we need to make sure that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and how do you help yourself and have others that are aware. And I think that what we have the benefit of is being a smaller agency. So we're about 100 total staff with 70 sworn. We know each other. We're a small, close-knit community. And so while we're, maybe a mid-sized department, everyone kind of knows each other. It's very easy to pick out who's off. And just kind of, you can see it in their performance, you can see it in their attitude, the calls they've been going to, them well enough to know that their voice is different. And so I think we have the luxury of being able to recognize from kind of that early intervention standpoint of when something's just awry. But I do think that people entering the profession need to be aware, and we as leaders need to help them become resilient and not like mislead them that like we're going to keep you happy, safe, and whole.
Mm,
Like part of that responsibility is a shared responsibility. And this job is tough, and you will face adversity, but we'll get through it and we'll help you. And if you need assistance beyond what we can offer, we have all these resources and things that we can do before you take, those impacts into your own hands.
yeah, no, thank you for that because one of a couple things that you said that I wanted to ask you about. One was, of course, there's some like a level of introspection on the individual to understand if and when they need that support. But then also having people who are looking out for you, I think is wildly important. And like you said, whether that's someone within the organization or someone outside of the organization who can sense those changes, whether that's a friend, a family member, and then having those people feel empowered to also say something or ask the questions. The other thing too, and we talked about this offline, in the context of proactive wellness, we talked a little bit about maybe the younger officers not really fully knowing what to expect and the emotional impact that this profession can have. How do you address that? Like, how do you prepare someone? And I've had this question before, and I think a lot of people are asking this question, like, how do you prepare someone for what they have never experienced before? Is there a way to prepare them for what is to come, or is it just through actually experiencing those and then having the resources after the fact?
Yeah, I think it's an imperfect science.
Mm,
I think a lot of it depends on the individuals. For me, we had a critical incident when I was in second phase of FTO. So very quickly, my experiences were shaped by going through that process and seeing how impactful it was for my coworkers, for myself, all my family.
yeah.
Uh, but I think that, having the conversation, talking about the team briefings do an amazing job. We do a great job of debriefing tactical situations, but talking about things internally in those small groups, checking in on door to door, and just setting them up to be successful. I think what I've seen with the new generation getting in is they're super intelligent, they're super smart, they're super confident. And sometimes there's a little bit of overconfidence where they say like, I know what I'm doing, I've got it, I don't need your help. And they don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing, but they want to instill confidence in us that they do.
Mm,
And so, explaining um, some of the fundamentals and having those basic conversations and setting them up for, for the realities, or, just checking in with them on how they're doing. A lot of these are young adults that are just going out on their own or buying a home and dealing with financials or raising young children. And they're going through a lot of unique personal experiences on top of unique new experiences within their job. And it's difficult being an adult in 2025. And so I think that, we really expect our supervisors to have a really strong pulse on their people How
Yeah.
are they doing? What are they working on? What do they want to be successful at? Where do they think they need support and assistance in? And developing that relationship so that when and if there's those moments when they do need help, that it's not this is the sergeant that kicks back my reports and I don't even want to go in their office and have a conversation with them, or who is the informal leader on that team that I can have that private conversation with. Or, we have a meet with our chaplains and our peer support team members in their orientation within the the organization itself.
Mm.
And so they've built that muscle memory of having mentors and peers and confidants from day one. The other thing that we do is we pull spouses in.
Mm.
And, oftentimes they're like, we've known these things are happening, but we don't have a connection or a networking into the organization. And so we try to integrate everyone on board early, uh, have the conversations. So it's just the norm that it's not unusual to be talking about these things. It doesn't need to be veiled in secrecy and taboo, and just making it real that it's okay. And if you get to a call and you handle it, and or if you're in a call and you can't handle it, like, call us. We'll get you help. We'll get over there. We'll tap you out. But we don't want someone suffering in silence. And we're all humans. We all just need a little bit of help sometimes.
Yeah, you talked about like really wanting to offer everything, as many resources as possible, but then there's also the challenge of budget and funding. And so within your organization, how do you decide what matters most and maybe where to spend those limited dollars that you do have available?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's some really influential people that I've looked to, that our organizations look to. Uh, you know, Pinole retired Chief Neil Gang has been really impactful for us and been a close peer in our region. And he's really talked about that. Like, wellness looks different to everybody. And so what you perceive as helpful for you may not be helpful to another. And I think for us, like, there's a lot of things out there on the market. There's a lot of programs, there's a lot of equipment, there's, the Cadillac versions of things. But um, yeah, how do you do that on a municipal police department's shoestring budget's challenging. But I think there's a lot of little things that you can do, and listening to your people on what are they wanting, what are they seeking. And then there's just like kind of the essentials, right? Like making sure that your programs that you have and your HR processes and your services are working. We were hearing like, I can't find a clinician in our region that has experience working with law enforcement. I don't really want to go talk to a marriage family therapist about police work that has no concept of what I'm dealing with. And so there's things that you can do fine tuning within these programmatic pieces, and then just trying to add as much as you can, because um, like I said, it may be something that seems insignificant or trivial, or, does yoga really work, right? But maybe it works for that one person. Does mindfulness work, right? Um, all these different things. And so just having the opportunities available, I think, is the most important piece, as well as the willingness to try it. And if it doesn't work, like, what are you out? Um, we really, from our city and our department's perspective, we like to pilot things. And sometimes being on the forefront is difficult, or it doesn't work out. But when you pilot something, you can take a little bit of a risk and try something, and you can always pivot away from it. So we're really open to trying things, to trying to listen to what our staff need. And I think that with a really different generation getting into policing, it's more important than ever to try to listen to what their needs are and the things that they're asking for.
Yeah, I appreciate that mindset of trying things because I think sometimes people are scared of quote unquote failure or something not working out, but I appreciate that of like, hey, we're going to try it. And then if it doesn't work, then at least we know we tried and then we can always pivot to something else. It's also really interesting that you said Chief Gang because he has been really instrumental for me as well. And he was actually the first California agency that I ever worked with. And when we had our initial conversation, it was over Zoom like this. And he looked at me and like we had this whole conversation, about what I do. And then he was like, okay, tell me about you. And he just like stared me in the eyes. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I told you. And he was like, no, like I want to know you. And I was like, but I'm perfect. It was like that moment where I was like trying to like be perfect. And he goes, listen, he goes, I've talked to a lot of people. Like, I did my research on you. He's like, and I want you to tell me about you and like your background. And it was one of the first times that anyone has cared enough to ask me and to like genuinely want to know about me and my background. And it was so terrifying to have that like moment of vulnerability and to just like share my why and like what I had been through and my childhood. And I really appreciated that. Like it was afterwards, like I realized that like I think that was like a pivotal moment for me too, in my wellness and realizing what we talked about before of like how unrelatable is it to say that you're perfect and how freeing and empowering is it to share our collective stories with each other. But I really appreciated him taking that moment because I was a stranger at that point to like sit down, talk to me about it. And then of course now I've known him for several years and I know the great work that he's done in the community. And now I don't know if he ever stopped working. Like I know he retired, but still see him like very, very active out there. I was just texting him the other day and was like, I hope you're doing well in retirement. It seems like he is. He's thriving. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought him up because I agree with you. I've had really good experiences.
Yeah, I think leaders like him, leaders like my former chief, Ken Savano, really taught me the value of relationships,
Mm,
right? And I think we do, and there's this whole concept of community policing, right? That's the buzzword right now. And everybody's doing a program and we're going to do all these things and it's about community engagement, but fundamentally it's about developing relationships and positively influencing others.
yeah.
And I think that the one thing a lot of organizations lose sight of, and especially as chiefs, I think we get accused of it. You're so focused externally, which yeah, that's your role. Oftentimes going to city council, talking to the community members, going to these, speaking engagements, but you don't want to lose sight of the relationships that you have with your staff. And you should definitely be encouraging everyone at every rank to be developing those internal relationships with one another because it's where trust comes from. That's where the confidence to have difficult conversations, to intervene, to pick each other up is really created from. And that's where you develop that empathy that you've raised a few times and that grace for one another that we're going to have good days, we're going to have bad days, we're going to have successes, but there's going to be other things that we need to work through. And so yeah, I think that when we all slow down and we push the work aside and we really engage with one another from a human perspective and learn about what makes each other tick, then we will be able to navigate almost anything. And I think that's a really good, strong message internally and externally.
I agree. And I think that everyone at the end of the day wants to feel valued and everyone wants to feel seen. And I think that I'm guilty of this too, of being so busy and so in my own way, in my own space that like I don't take a moment to like slow down and to look around and to like look people in the eye and say hi and and have conversations even in my personal life. I'm guilty of that too. And so I think that when we can remember that like you said, we're all humans, and I think that fundamentally we all want to feel like we matter as individuals. I think that if we can start to make those small efforts, it's going to make a big impact over time. My final question for you before we wrap, what words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the things that I've come to enjoy now, and I talked about how we ask certain questions and try to lay this foundation of managing some expectations from our Chiefs interviews, where I have an applicant come in and talk about, why do they want to enter in the business and why should they allow me to give them my trust and the community's trust to serve. But often what I hear and what they share is an impactful moment, something that happened, often when they were 10 or 12 years old, where they had an interaction or the police responded and they took away from that event, this purpose of wanting to return their gratitude and provide their um, service back to their community and be helpful. And so, I think we all see those 5 and 10 year cops that kind of lose sight of that North Star and they forget why they got in and they're pissed off that the district attorney didn't file this case or that we've got this new policing initiative and I don't understand why the chief's making this the thing that we've got to do or why does the community care about these things. And so I would just, encourage people to remember why they entered in the business
Yeah.
and don't get caught up in the noise and continue to do the right things because they're the right things to do, especially when no one's looking. And the work's not always easy, but the little things matter and the community doesn't always hear or see it, but it has impact and they're making a difference. And when we're all working to go together and being professional, that we're pushing this profession forward
Yeah.
and we're doing really remarkable work in difficult situations. And so, with all that, I think we also, we all got into this job because it was fun and we wanted to, arrest people in appropriate situations and protect people and things. And so I hope that people find their joy in the work as well. So remember why you got in, find what you enjoy within the work and where those things align in that Venn diagram of overlapping interests with your departmental missions and our sense of service to our communities, light that fire and go forward and take the initiative and seize the opportunities that present themselves within your organization because the people coming up are bright. We're all not going to be in this career forever. And so I'm excited for the next generation of leaders and young minds coming into the profession behind us.
Thank you. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone out there stays safe.
Thank you.